I think I like flawed characters and I like writing flawed characters. I also like reading flawed characters, and there are definite flaws in all of the characters in this story. And to me, that if you're writing realism, that gives you more of a truthful sense to the way people behave. Hi, I'm Sean Wilson. My book's called You Must Remember This, out with Affirm Press. So You Must Remember This is a story about memory and what happens to us and the people around us when the stories about our life start to slip away. She's definitely a fictional character, but I guess like all writers, I've drawn on observations and some little snippets of people around me in order to make Grace feel real and natural. I think what the trigger for me writing this book was my grandmother. My dad's mom had dementia. And while this isn't, Grace isn't an avatar of my grandmother, there are certain experiences that Grace goes through that really reflect some of the experiences that my grandmother went through. Yeah, what I try and do with research is to look for personal histories. I think with something like dementia, it's really important to get the facts right. You don't want to make mistakes with something like illness because there's some sensitivity around that. But I really look for what the human stories are around that. So I read a lot of personal histories about people who had dementia. I also sent off an early draft to some friends who had grandparents who had dementia, just to get their understanding of whether or not it felt real to them. And so that's kind of what I leaned on very much in a research way. I didn't want it to read like a medical case study because it's really not what a novel was for. And I wanted to focus on the character growth and the relationship change that happens in the novel. But I did obviously want to get some things right about dementia and make sure it felt real to people, that it felt truthful. One of the fundamental things that I've done in the book is that it's not a chronological story. And that's very obvious early on. The book starts, and I've even numbered the chapters out of sequence to get that sense of dislocation of time across to the reader. So it starts at chapter 10 and then moves on, and the chapter numbers are all jumbled. I've had a couple of people tell me that they thought at first the book was misprinted, or that the binding, there was some issue with the binding, which I can assure people that's not the case. It's meant to start on chapter 10 as the first chapter. But I think what I was trying to get across with that is that sense of Grace is getting lost in between the present and the past. And that's something that I saw my grandmother go through, where she was interacting with us in the present, with her family and with the people in the aged care facility. But she was also talking about her parents who were long dead on the other side of the world, as if they were about to visit. And she seemed to be sort of living in both realities at the same time, at least in her mind. As I wanted to get a sense for the reader, but also for me, what that experience might have been like for her, to be trapped a little bit in like a little bit lost in time, I suppose is the way to put it. Grace's backstory is fictional. She had a tough upbringing, and so she's reliving some of the harder moments of her childhood with a mother who was alcoholic and a father who's a little bit absent a lot of the time. And in a sense, she sort of raises her siblings and has to grow up very fast, and has some things that I suppose in those formative years in your adolescence, when you're starting to understand more about the people around you and about adult life, she gets those really quickly and in stark contrast. So she relives those moments. And I think what I was trying to get at with that is in the present, in the sort of the main timeline of the book, when Grace is elderly and she's got dementia, she's sort of trying to and missing these moments of connection with her own daughter. And what I was trying to get at with that is there's sort of sometimes some traits that we might pick up from our parents, they've picked up from their parents, and there might be some experiences that we have that sort of create a little bit of an emotional block. And I was trying to explore whether or not Grace could get through that. And while she's going through this condition of dementia, while there's almost, from a narrative sense, like a ticking clock going on in the story, where she's only got so much time and Liz and Grace want to connect, but there are some sort of things that are getting in the way. Likeability is the interesting thing with characters. I think I like flawed characters and I like writing flawed characters. I also like reading flawed characters, and there are definite flaws in all of the characters in this story. And to me, that if you're writing realism, that gives you more of a truthful sense to the way people behave. I think there are many things that you can forgive in the characters if you understand where they're coming from. So Liz in the story, so Liz is sort of the carer of Grace, her daughter. She is in that kind of primary care role, and she gets quite frustrated at Grace at times. And I think that that's something that's quite natural. I mean, it's very difficult, and I've seen it with my own grandmother, to sort of see yourself disappearing in your loved one's eyes, and how frustrating that might be, and how you might want to sort of fight against the condition and be frustrated and be not accepting of what situation you're in with that person. And so she has moments where she gets frustrated with Grace, and that's not a likable thing, but I think it's an understandable thing, and it's a truthful thing. So that's, I guess, what I was trying to get across. They're not all monsters, and far from it. They have redeeming qualities, but we're not all likable all the times, especially under some very difficult circumstances. So my first book, Gemini Falls, came out in 2022. Gemini Falls is a very different book. It's a sort of a mystery crime coming of age story. And what I wanted to achieve with that, and hopefully got it across, was I wanted to explore certain things about bigger communities in terms of financial crisis and housing displacement and what might happen. And what I decided to do with that was to create a small community where there's a crime that sort of puts pressure on the community, and then I could explore those themes. There's obviously relationships that are going on and some other things. I think I was probably biting off quite a lot with that novel, and it was working in a genre, or at least a couple of genres and different conventions that I wasn't comfortable with, but it felt quite good to have that kind of, to push myself in that sense. I hadn't written anything like that before, and I wrote it during lockdown, so it was sort of my lockdown project in a sense, when a lot of us were making cocktails for the first time and making sourdough bread. I was trying to write in these kind of genre conventions for the first time, so that was sort of my lockdown project. I think I came to it gradually over sort of adolescent years. It's something that I think I always was interested in storytelling, and members of my family are really good storytellers. I don't have a sort of model of artistic person in my family, or even in like the community that I grew up with. So I think it took me a while to get to the point where that's how I wanted to explore the interest in storytelling. And so I suppose in my late teens, I started writing short stories, and then have been slowly working my way up to the point of writing novels. Actually, what happened was I wrote the manuscript for You Must Remember This first, which was based on a play that I wrote more than 10 years ago. So it's not the cleanest way of approaching writing works. I suppose it's very unorthodox to write a play and then later on come back to it and rewrite it as a novel. I don't recommend anyone do that. But so Gemini Falls, in a sense, was the second novel manuscript that I wrote. And so for me, that was where I was moving out and into something that I wasn't comfortable with, in that sense, and trying something new. To me, You Must Remember This, and the kind of the family story that I am exploring, and that feels a little bit more in my wheelhouse, I suppose. What I really love reading, and maybe I don't want to be too reductive, but in a general kind of sense, what I'm looking for is someone who can tell a really good story. So take me from A to B in terms of character growth and relationship change and exploring themes, but then also is really beautiful on a sentence level and really artistic. So those are the two things that, as much as possible, someone who can tell a really good story and someone who can tell it really beautifully. That's what I'm really looking for. And I don't really mind the subject matter, the genre, anything else. As long as you can do that, then I'm in. And so that's not a very good answer to a question that's not very specific, but that's really, if I'm reading a book and I can feel that I'm in safe hands and it's beautiful, I'll read about anything. I don't mind the topic. Maybe I'm a little bit late to the party, but I'm reading Dusk by Robbie Arnott at the moment. And that is one of those books where I can tell I'm in safe hands. I really think he's one of the best writers working in this country and deserves an international readership. He's that good. And so that on a sentence level, is really precise, and you really feel that he's thought about every single word, which is impressive. And then on a story level, I just feel immersed, and I feel like I'm in safe hands with taking me through a journey with characters. So that's a delight, and I'm slowly getting through that. I've got a 3-month-old, and so reading time to read at the moment is a bit of a challenge, but when I have the time, it's a delight picking up that book. I am working on something new. I'm only about 20,000 words in, and like I said, I've got a 3-month-old, and so I'm not sure how long it's going to take me to complete this one, and I'm not even sure how big it's going to be. It feels like early days for me, and when I'm working on something, to me it kind of feels like there's a nocturnal wild animal out there in the dark, and I don't want to shine a light on it and scare it away. And so I'm trying not to talk about it too much, and I'm trying not to interrogate it. From a craft sense, I'm exploring it, but I'm trying not to shine a light on it, if that makes sense. Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.